morning bell rang across the Galactic Military Academy as students from dozens of different worlds hurried to their classes. Among them, a small human girl named Hannah Kim walked slowly through the massive corridors. Her black hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she carried her books close to her chest, while other students talked loudly about their weekend adventures. Hannah remained silent. She entered Combat Theory Classroom 7B and took her usual seat in the back corner. The chair was too big for her small frame, making her look even smaller than she already was. Round her, alien students filled the room with their impressive presence. The Vorthak warriors stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick blue skin and muscles that bulged beneath their uniforms. The reptilian sectar students moved with deadly grace, their scaled hands ending in sharp claws. Even the insectoid Crystal students looked dangerous with their 6 arms and compound eyes that could see in all directions at once. Hannah opened her notebook and began writing as the other students continued their conversations. She wrote down everything she observed about each species. The Vorthok relied on their strength and size. The Sectar used speed in their natural weapons. The Crystal had excellent coordination with their multiple limbs. Filled page after page with notes about fighting styles, weaknesses, and behavioral patterns. "Look at the little human," whispered a Vorthok student named Kale. He was the biggest student in the class and had never lost a fight since arriving at the academy. "She thinks she can learn to fight by writing in a book." His friends laughed quietly. "Humans are so weak," said another Vorthok. "They have no claws, no armor, no poison. What can they possibly do in combat?" Hannah heard every word but kept writing. She had learned long ago that it was better to listen than to speak. Her grandfather had taught her that lesson when she was just 5 years old. The classroom door slammed open with a loud bang. Instructor Vextar entered the room, his reptilian form moving with predatory smoothness. His yellow eyes swept across the students, and everyone immediately fell silent. Even the confident Vorthok students straightened in their seats. "Today, we discussed the fundamentals of combat," Vextar announced, his voice carrying a slight hiss. "Each species brings natural advantages to battle. The Vorthok have strength. The Sectar have speed. The Crystal have coordination. The Zephyrians have flight." His gaze stopped on Hannah. "And the humans have, well, we shall see what humans have." More quiet laughter rippled through the classroom. Hannah continued writing, but her grip on her pen tightened slightly. "Combat is not just about physical ability," Vextar continued, beginning to pace at the front of the room. "It is about understanding your enemy, adapting to situations, and using whatever advantages you possess. However, some species are naturally better suited for warfare than others." He pointed to Kale. Vorthok warriors have been the backbone of the Galactic Defense Force for centuries. Their strength allows them to wear heavy armor and use weapons that would crush smaller species. If they heal quickly from injuries and can fight for hours without tiring. Kale sat up straighter, proud of the recognition. His blue skin seemed to glow with confidence. "The Sectar are natural hunters," Vextar continued, gesturing to a group of scaled students. "Their reflexes are 3 times faster than most species. They can strike before their enemies even realize they are under attack. Their scales provide natural armor, and their claws can cut through metal." The Sectar students nodded, their forked tongues flicking out to taste the air. "The Crystal excel at group combat," Vextar said, looking at the insectoid students. "Their multiple limbs allow them to use several weapons at once. Their compound eyes give them a full view of the battlefield. They communicate through pheromones, making them excellent team fighters." Throughout this praise of other species, Hannah kept writing. She noted how each species took pride in their natural abilities. She also noticed how they looked down on species that seemed weaker than them. "And then we have the humans," Vextar said, his voice taking on a different tone. Humans are ... Interesting. They have no claws, no scales, no natural weapons. They are smaller than most warrior species. They tire easily and heal slowly. Yet somehow, they convinced the Galactic Council to allow them into this academy. Other students turned to look at Hannah. She was the only human in the class, and suddenly she felt every pair of eyes on her. But she did not look up from her notebook. Instead, she wrote down Vexter's words exactly as he spoke them. Perhaps, Vexter continued, humans have some hidden ability that we have not yet discovered. Or perhaps they are simply foolish enough to believe they can compete with species that are naturally superior in every way. A Sectar student raised her clawed hand. Instructor, why are humans even allowed in the academy? They seem useless in combat. That is an excellent question, Vexter replied. The truth is that humans are here as part of a diplomatic agreement. Their planet recently joined the Galactic Alliance, and they requested representation in our military training programs. We could not refuse without causing political problems. Hannah finally looked up from her writing. For just a moment, her dark eyes met Vextar's yellow ones. The instructor expected to see hurt or anger in her expression. Instead, he saw something that made him slightly uncomfortable. Her eyes were completely calm, almost calculating. T looked at him the same way a scientist might look at an interesting specimen. However, Vextar continued, breaking eye contact. Next week, we will begin practical combat training. All students will participate in sparring matches and combat exercises. This will give us a chance to see what each species can actually do in battle, not just in theory. The room buzzed with excitement. The Vorthok students flexed their muscles. The Sectar students extended their claws. The Crystal students clicked their mandibles in anticipation. I should warn you, Vextar added, that these exercises are not games. You will face real opponents who will try to defeat you. Some of you may be injured. Some of you may discover that you are not as capable as you believed. Its eyes found Hannah again, okay? And some of you may find that this academy is not the place for you. The bell rang, ending the class. Students began gathering their things and talking excitedly about the upcoming combat training. Hannah closed her notebook and stood up slowly. She walked toward the door. She overheard more conversations. I cannot wait to show everyone what a real warrior can do, Kel said to his friends. The human girl will probably quit after the first day, laughed a Sectar student. She is smart. She will leave before she gets seriously hurt, added another dot. Hannah walked past them all without a word. But if anyone had been watching carefully, they might have noticed a small smile that briefly crossed her lips. It was not a smile of happiness or friendliness. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret that no one else did. As she left the classroom, Hannah thought about her grandfather's words from long ago. Hannah, he had said, the greatest weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. She had a feeling that next week was going to be very interesting indeed. The Academy's training grounds stretched across several acres of carefully maintained combat zones. Each area was designed to test different fighting skills. There were open fields for long-range combat, rocky terrain for close-quarters fighting, and obstacle courses that challenged speed and agility. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training equipment as students gathered for their first practical combat assessment. Hannah Kim stood at the edge of the group, watching as an instructor. Vextar explained the day's activities. She wore the standard academy training uniform, but it looked loose on her small frame. Other students towered over her, their natural weapons and armor gleaming in the sunlight. Today, you will demonstrate your combat abilities, Vextar announced, his yellow eyes scanning the assembled students. We will start with basic sparring matches. Each of you will face opponents from different species. Okay, this will help you understand how to fight enemies who do not share your natural advantages. A human boy named June Park moved closer to Hannah. He was the only other human in their year, and he had been trying to befriend her since classes began. June was tall for a human, but still shorter than most alien students. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and he always seemed nervous around the other species. "Are you ready for this?" June whispered to Hannah. "I heard that last year a student broke 3 ribs in the first day of combat training." Hannah nodded, but said nothing. She was studying the other students, watching how they moved and positioned themselves. The Warthog warriors stood in a tight group, their massive arms crossed over their chests. The Sector students moved restlessly, their tails swishing back and forth. Castell buzzed quietly to each other in their insect language. "First match," Vextar called out. "Kale Vorthog versus Rickstar Sectar." The 2 students stepped into the combat circle. Kale was huge, even for a Vorthog, his blue skin marked with scars from previous battles. His opponent was a sleek Sectar, female, with dark green scales and razor-sharp claws. Both fighters looked confident as they faced each other. "Begin," Vextar commanded. The fight was brutal and fast. Vextar moved like lightning, her claws striking out in quick combinations. But Kale's thick skin absorbed most of the damage, and his strength was overwhelming. Within minutes, he had grabbed her arm and thrown her out of the circle. The match was over. "Excellent demonstration," Vextar said. Kale used his natural advantages well. Rickstar showed good technique, but could not overcome the strength difference. More matches followed. A crystal fighter used all 6 arms to defeat a Zephyrian, who tried to rely on aerial attacks. 2 Warthog warriors battled until one finally overpowered the other through sheer force. Each match showed the same pattern. The stronger or more naturally gifted fighter usually won. "Hannah Kim," Vextar called out. "You will face Vector Crystal." Hannah stepped into the circle. Her opponent was a male crystal with bright orange chitin and compound eyes that reflected the sunlight. He was twice her size and had 4 arms that ended in sharp points. "Okay." The other students gathered around to watch, many of them laughing quietly. "Okay. This should be quick," someone whispered. "The human girl looked scared," another student said. But Hannah did not look scared. She looked calm and focused as she studied her opponent. Vector clicked his mandibles in what might have been amusement. He clearly thought this would be an easy victory. "Begin," Vextar said. Vector rushed forward with all 4 arms extended. He was fast and coordinated, just as Hannah had expected from studying his species. But instead of trying to match his speed, Hannah did something unexpected. She stepped backward and to the side, letting him rush past her. As he tried to turn around, she grabbed one of his arms and used his own momentum to send him stumbling. The crystal recovered quickly and attacked again. This time he was more careful, using his reach advantage to strike from a distance. Hannah avoided his attacks, but made no effort to counter. She seemed to be losing badly, always retreating and defending. "Fight back, human," Vector chittered. "Show me what your species can do." Hannah said nothing. She continued to move backward, dodging and weaving around his attacks. To the watching students, it looked like she was barely surviving. But if anyone had watched her eyes, they would have seen something different. She was not panicking or desperate. She was learning. After several minutes of one-sided combat, Vector grew frustrated. He launched himself at Hannah with all 4 arms, trying to overwhelm her with pure aggression. This time, instead of dodging, Hannah stepped forward. She moved inside his reach, where his long arms could not hit her effectively. Then she struck him once in the center of his chest. The blow did not look powerful, but Vector suddenly stopped moving. He stood, frozen for a moment, then slowly toppled backward. He was not unconscious, but he could not seem to coordinate his movements anymore. "Match over," Vextar announced, sounding surprised. "Hannah Kim wins by incapacitation." The other students stared in shock. How had the small human girl defeated a crystal warrior. Dictar was already recovering, shaking his head to clear it, but he looked confused and embarrassed. "How did you do that?" June asked Hannah as she walked back to the group. "I watched him fight," Hannah said simply. "All species have weak spots. You just need to know where to look." More matches continued throughout the day. Hannah faced 2 more opponents, losing both times. Against a Vorthok warrior, she was too slow to avoid its powerful attacks. Against a Sectar, she could not match the reptilian speed. Each time she was defeated, the other students relaxed. Her first victory must have been luck, they decided, but Hannah did not seem bothered by her losses. She studied each opponent carefully, learning their techniques and weaknesses. When she was thrown out of the circle or pinned to the ground, she got up without complaint and walked calmly back to the group. "The human is weak," Kel said to his friends after defeating Hannah easily. "She got lucky against a bug, but she cannot really fight. She moves strangely," observed a sector student. "It's not like a trained warrior. It's more like someone who learned to fight on the streets." "Humans do not have proper combat training," another student added. "They are too new to the galaxy to understand real warfare." As the day ended, Instructor Vextar gathered the students together. "Today, you have seen the importance of natural advantages in combat," he said. "Those with superior strength, speed, or weapons will usually defeat those without such gifts. However, next week, we will begin tournament-style matches. These will be more serious fights with real consequences." He paused to look at each student. "I should warn you that not all of you will advance to the final rounds. Some will be eliminated early due to injury or poor performance. The tournament will separate the true warriors from those who merely pretend to be fighters." His eyes found Hannah in the crowd. "Strongly advised students who are clearly outmatched to consider withdrawing now. There is no shame in recognizing your limitations before you get seriously hurt." The other students nodded in agreement. All assumed he was talking about the humans, especially Hannah. She had shown some strange techniques, but overall she seemed weak and inexperienced. After the class ended, June walked with Hannah back to the dormitories. "Are you going to withdraw from the tournament?" he asked. "Some of these fighters are really dangerous. That Kel guy has never lost a match." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "My grandfather used to say that the best time to strike is when your enemy thinks you are defeated," she finally said. "What does that mean?" June asked. Hannah smiled slightly. "It means that sometimes losing is just another way of winning." That night, while the other students celebrated their victories or nursed their defeats, Hannah sat alone in her room. She opened a notebook and began writing, page after page filled with observations about fighting styles, weak points, and behavioral patterns. She wrote about Kale's overconfidence, about how the Sectar relied too much on their speed, about how the Crystal became frustrated when their coordination was disrupted. By the time she finished writing, the academy was dark and quiet. Hannah closed her notebook and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere among those distant lights was Earth, her home world. She thought about her grandfather's lessons, about the underground fighting circuits where she had learned to survive against impossible odds. The other students thought she was weak. They thought she was out of her depth. They thought she would quit before getting seriously hurt. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The main combat arena was packed with students from all grade levels. The circular fighting pit in the center was surrounded by rising seats that could hold over 1,000 spectators. Today marked the beginning of the Academy's combat tournament, and excitement filled the air like electricity before a storm. Hannah Kim sat in the competitor section, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Around her, the other tournament fighters stretched their muscles and tested their weapons. Vorthok warriors flexed their massive arms and compared battle scars. The Sectar students practiced their lightning-fast strikes in the air. Crystal buzzed nervously to each other in their insect language. A large display screen showed the tournament bracket. 64 students from different species would fight in single elimination matches. Only one would be crowned champion. Hannah's name appeared in the lower bracket, matched against a Zephyrian warrior named Velthor for the first round. At that, laughed a Warthog student. The human girl is in the tournament. She will be eliminated in the first round. Maybe she will quit before the fight even starts, added another. She looked scared during practice. Hannah heard their comments, but showed no reaction. She was studying the bracket, memorizing the names and species of every fighter. In her mind, she was already planning several fights ahead. June Park leaned over to her. "Are you nervous?" he whispered. "That Zephyria you are fighting can fly. How are you going to reach him?" "Flying is not always an advantage," Hannah replied softly. "Sometimes it just makes you an easier target." The arena speakers crackled to life. "Welcome to the 847th Annual Combat Tournament," announced Commander Thane, the Academy's headmaster. He was a tall, thin alien with silver skin and 4 arms. "Today, we will see which species produce the finest warriors in the galaxy." The crowd cheered loudly. Students from every species waved banners and shouted support for their favorites. The noise was deafening, but Hannah sat in perfect silence. The first match, Commander Thane continued. Hannah Kim of Earth versus Velthor of Zephyria. Hannah stood up slowly and walked toward the combat pit. Her opponent was already waiting inside the circle. Velthor was a Zephyrian, which meant he looked almost human except for the large feathered wings folded against his back. His skin was pale blue, and his eyes were bright yellow. He wore light armor that would not interfere with his flight. "I will try to make this quick, little human," Velthor said as Hannah entered the circle. "I do not enjoy hurting smaller species." "That is very kind of you," Hannah replied, her voice completely calm. The referee, a heavily armored crystal, raised his arm. "Fighters ready. Begin." Velthor immediately spread his wings and launched himself into the air. He circled above Hannah like a hunting bird, looking for the best angle to attack. The crowd cheered as he performed aerial tricks, showing off his natural flying ability. "Come down and fight," someone shouted from the stands. But Velthor was not showing off. He was using a smart strategy. By staying in the air, he could attack from any direction while remaining out of reach of ground-based opponents. It was a technique that had won him many victories. Hannah stood in the center of the circle, turning slowly to keep her opponent in sight. She made no attempt to jump or throw anything at him. She simply watched and waited. After circling for nearly a minute, Velthor folded his wings and dove toward Hannah like a missile. His feet extended forward, aiming to strike her in the chest. I.e., it was a powerful attack that used his speed and body weight as weapons. But Hannah was not there when he arrived. She had moved just one step to the side, and Velthor crashed into the ground where she had been standing. Before he could recover, Hannah grabbed his left wing and twisted it in a direction it was not meant to go. Velthor screamed in pain and tapped the ground rapidly with his free hand. This was the signal for surrender. The referee immediately stopped the match. "Winner, Hannah Kim," the referee announced. The crowd fell silent. They had expected the human to be defeated quickly, but instead she had won in less than 2 minutes. In the competitor section, the other fighters began to murmur among themselves. "How did she do that?" asked a Sector student. "She barely moved," said another. "The Zephyrian just flew into her hands." Hannah helped Velthor to his feet and made sure his wing was not seriously damaged. "You fought well," she told him. "Your strategy was good. You just needed to be more careful with your landing." As the matches continued, Hannah watched every fight carefully. She saw how different species fought when they were under pressure. She noticed which techniques worked and which ones failed. Most importantly, she observed how the crowd's favorite Kale Vorthok demolished his opponents with raw strength and aggression. The second round began the next day. Hannah faced a heavily armored Groklian warrior named Thudmer. The Groklians were known for their thick, stone-like skin and incredible defensive abilities. Thudmer looked like a walking boulder, with arms and legs. "You cannot hurt me, small human," Thudmer rumbled in a voice like grinding rocks. "My skin is harder than steel. Your weak attacks will break against my armor." "I believe you," Hannah said politely. When the match began, Thudmer charged forward like a living, battering ram. His strategy was simple: absorb his opponent's attacks, and then crush them with his massive strength. It had worked in dozens of previous fights, but Hannah did not try to attack his armored skin. Instead, she moved around him in circles, always staying just out of reach. Thudmer swung his huge fists, but they only hit empty air. He was strong and tough, but he was also slow and clumsy. For several minutes, the crowd watched what looked like a strange dance. Thudmer would attack, and Hannah would avoid him. He would charge, and she would step aside. He would try to grab her, and she would slip away like smoke. "Stand still and fight," Thudmer shouted, breathing heavily. But Hannah continued to move. She was not just avoiding his attacks, she was studying him. She noticed how he favored his left leg. She saw how his breathing became labored after extended movement. She observed the small gap in his armor where his helmet met his chest piece. Finally, Thudmer made a mistake. He lunged forward too far and lost his balance. As he stumbled, Hannah stepped behind him and struck the back of his knee with her elbow. The joint buckled, and the massive warrior crashed to the ground before he could get up. Hannah placed her hand on the gap in his armor and pressed gently against his throat. "Do you surrender?" she asked. Thudmer tried to roll over, but his position was too awkward. He tapped the ground in defeat. "Winner, Hannah Kim," the referee announced. This time, the crowd was not silent. They were confused and excited. Had the small human defeated two opponents who seemed much stronger than her? In the competitor section, the remaining fighters began to pay attention to Hannah. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just another weak human who would be eliminated quickly. "She's using some kind of trick," said a Sectar warrior. "All fighters use tricks," replied a Crystal, but her tricks seemed to work. As the tournament continued, more fighters were eliminated. The field of 64 became 32, then 16, then 8. Through it all, Hannah continued to win her matches. She defeated a psychic Tellurian by emptying her mind of all thoughts, making his mental attacks useless. She overcame a poisonous Vektari by holding her breath and fighting in complete silence. Each victory was different, but they all followed the same pattern. Hannah would study her opponent, find their weakness, and then exploit it with surgical precision. She never used more force than necessary. And she never showed anger or aggression. By the time the semifinals arrived, only 4 fighters remained. There was Kale Vorthok, who had destroyed every opponent with brutal efficiency. There was Silthara, a Sectar assassin who moved like liquid death. There was Zerkith, a crystal warrior who fought with 6 weapons at once. And there was Hannah Kim, a quiet human girl who had somehow made it this far. The semi-final bracket was displayed on the screen. Hannah would face Zerkith, while Kale would fight Silthara. The winners would meet in the final match. As Hannah prepared for her next fight, she noticed something that made her smile slightly. For the first time since arriving at the academy, the other students were not laughing at her. They were watching her with respect and curiosity, but more importantly, they were watching her with caution. They finally understood that the quiet human girl was not as harmless as she appeared. The real test, however, was yet to come. If she could win her semi-final match, she would face the winner of the other bracket, and everyone knew that winner would most likely be Kale Vorthok, the undefeated champion who had never lost a fight in his life. Hannah looked at her notebook one more time, reviewing her observations about the remaining fighters. Tomorrow would determine whether her patience and preparation had been enough, or whether she would finally meet an opponent she could not defeat. The tournament was far from over. The Academy's championship arena was unlike anything the students had seen before. This was not just a regular combat pit used for daily training. This was the grand arena reserved for the most important fights of the year. The circular fighting area was 3 times larger than normal, surrounded by towering walls of polished metal that reflected the bright lights overhead. Every seat in the arena was filled. Students from all grade levels had come to watch the semifinals and final match. Even the instructors and academy staff had taken time from their duties to witness the tournament's conclusion. The air hummed with excitement and nervous energy. Hannah Kim sat in the competitor waiting area, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Across from her, Circuit clicked his mandibles nervously. The Crystal Warrior had 6 arms, each holding a different weapon. He had trained for this moment his entire life, but facing the strange human girl made him uncertain. "I still do not understand how you have made it this far," Circuit said, his compound eyes studying Hannah carefully. "You are small, slow, and weak. What is your secret?" Hannah looked up at him with those dark, calm eyes. "No secret," she said simply. "I just pay attention." The arena speakers crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, the first semi-final match. Circuit of the Crystal Hive versus Hannah Kim of Earth." The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. Most of the noise was for Zerkith, who was known throughout the academy for his incredible coordination and weapon skills. But there was also a growing number of students who were curious about the human girl, who had surprised everyone. Hannah walked into the arena with the same calm pace she always used. The bright lights made her look even smaller than usual, but she showed no signs of being intimidated by the massive space or the screaming crowd. Kaith entered from the opposite side, his 6 weapons gleaming in the light. "It's Kathy," said B. "Interesting," Commander Thane announced from his viewing box. "Circuit has never lost a match where he could use all his weapons at once. But Hannah Kim has shown remarkable adaptability throughout this tournament." The referee, a massive Vorthok warrior, stepped into the center of the arena. "Fighters ready," he called out. Both competitors nodded and took their positions. The crowd gradually fell silent, waiting for the match to begin. "Fight!" Skix immediately spread all 6 arms wide, creating a wall of spinning weapons. He had swords, axes, spears, and energy blasters, all moving in perfect coordination. It was like fighting a tornado made of sharp metal and deadly energy. He advanced toward Hannah with mechanical precision, his weapons creating a pattern of attacks that seemed impossible to avoid. Hannah stood perfectly still, watching the approaching storm of weapons. To the crowd, it looked like she was frozen with fear, but her eyes were moving constantly, tracking each weapon's movement pattern. She was not scared. She was calculating at the last possible moment. Hannah stepped forward instead of backward. She moved directly into the center of Zerkith's attack pattern, where all the weapons were converging. It seemed like suicide, but somehow she slipped between the spinning blades without being touched. Now she was inside Zerkith's reach, where his long weapons were less effective. But the Crystal Warrior was prepared for this. He dropped his larger weapons and pulled out smaller knives, perfect for close combat. His 6 arms moved like lightning, striking from every direction at once. Hannah defended herself, but it was clear she was in trouble. Zerkith's coordination was incredible, and he could attack from angles that no other species could match. Small cuts appeared on her arms and legs where his knives found their mark. The crowd began to cheer for what looked like Zerkith's inevitable victory. But Hannah was not trying to win this exchange. She was learning. Each time Zerkith attacked, She memorized his pattern. She noticed that his upper arms moved slightly faster than his lower arms. She observed that he always attacked in the same sequence. Most importantly, she saw that he had to pause for a split second between attack combinations to reset his position. After several minutes of defensive fighting, Hannah found her opportunity. As Zerkith began his favorite attack pattern, she suddenly changed direction. Instead of moving away from his fastest arm, she moved toward it. This confused his coordination for just a moment, and his upper left arm struck his lower right arm. Instead of hitting Hannah, the brief tangle of limbs was all the opening Hannah needed. She struck Zerkis' main nerve cluster at the base of his neck with her knuckles. The crystal warrior immediately collapsed, his nervous system temporarily disrupted. Winner, Hannah Kim. The referee announced. The crowd went wild. They had just witnessed something that should have been impossible. A small human had defeated one of the most coordinated fighters in the galaxy using nothing but patience and precise timing. In the competitor section, the remaining fighters watched with new respect. Sothara, the Sectar assassin, hissed softly. "The human is more dangerous than she appears," she said to herself. But it was Kel Vorthok who was watching most intently. The massive blue warrior had been studying Hannah's fighting style throughout the tournament. He was beginning to understand that she was not just lucky, okay? She was skilled in ways that most fighters could not comprehend. The second semi-final match began shortly after. Kale faced Silithara in what many expected to be the real championship fight. The Sectar assassin was incredibly fast and deadly, her poison claws capable of ending a fight with a single scratch. But Kale was in a different league entirely. He was not just strong, he was experienced, intelligent, and completely ruthless. When Silthara attacked with her lightning-fast strikes, Kale simply absorbed the damage and waited for his moment. His thick skin protected him from her poison, and his superior reach allowed him to grab her before she could escape. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. Kale's victory was so overwhelming that even the crowd fell silent. This was the fighter that Hannah would have to face in the final match. Tomorrow, Commander Thane announced, "We will witness the championship match between Kel Vorthok and Hannah Kim. One will be crowned the Academy's combat champion." As the crowd began to disperse, conversations filled the air. Betting odds were being discussed everywhere. Kel was favored by enormous margins. Kia had never lost a fight, never even been seriously injured. Kia was bigger, stronger, faster, and more experienced than Hannah in every measurable way. "The human girl has no chance," said a Sectar instructor. "She has been lucky so far, but luck runs out eventually." "Kale will crush her in the first minute," agreed a Vorthok student. "She cannot possibly have a strategy for dealing with his strength," but not everyone was so certain. June Park found Hannah as she was leaving the arena. "Are you scared?" asked her. Hannah was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "No," she said finally. "I have been preparing for this fight my entire life." "But Cal has never lost," June insisted. "He is the strongest fighter in the Academy. Maybe the strongest in the galaxy." "Strength is not everything," Hannah replied. "My grandfather taught me that the strongest mountain can be moved by the smallest stream, if the stream is patient enough." That night, while the rest of the Academy celebrated or worried about the upcoming final match, Hannah sat alone in her room. She opened her notebook and read through months of observations about Kel Vorthok. She had watched him fight dozens of times, studied his techniques, and identified his patterns. Kel was indeed incredibly strong and skilled. He had defeated every opponent through a combination of overwhelming force and tactical intelligence. He was confident, experienced, and seemingly invincible. But Hannah had noticed something that others had missed. In every fight, Kel relied on intimidation as much as strength. He expected his opponents to be afraid of him, to make mistakes because they were worried about his power. His strategy was to use his reputation and physical presence to win fights before they really began. Hannah closed her notebook and looked out her window at the stars. Tomorrow, she would face the greatest challenge of her life, but she was not afraid. She had been underestimated by every opponent she had faced, and each time she had found a way to turn that underestimation into an advantage. Kale Warthog was about to learn the same lesson that all her previous opponents had learned. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. The final match would determine not just who won the tournament, but whether the galaxy was ready to accept that humans might be more than they appear to be. The championship arena was completely silent for the first time in its history. Every seat was filled with students, instructors, academy officials who had come to witness what many believed would be the shortest final match ever recorded. The only sound was the soft hum of the arena's energy field that protected the crowd from any stray attacks. Hannah Kim walked slowly into the center of the fighting circle. She wore the same plain training uniform she had worn throughout the tournament, but now it seemed different somehow. The fabric moved with her like a second skin, and her steps were perfectly balanced and controlled. Her dark hair was tied back in the same simple ponytail, and her hands hung loosely at her sides. From the opposite entrance, Kale Warthog entered like a force of nature. The massive Warthog warrior stood nearly 8 feet tall, his thick blue skin marked with battle scars from countless victories. His muscles bulged beneath his combat gear, and his yellow eyes burned with confident fire. The crowd erupted in cheers as he raised his arms above his head in triumph. "Look at the size difference," whispered a sector instructor in the stands. "The human girl barely reaches his chest." "This will be over in seconds," agreed a Crickstool observer. "Kale has never even been knocked down, let alone defeated." Commander Thane's voice echoed throughout the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, the championship match of the 847th Annual Combat Tournament. In the blue corner, representing the Vorthok Empire, the undefeated champion Kale Vorthok. In the red corner, representing Earth, the surprising finalist Hannah Kim." The crowd's response was overwhelmingly in favor of Kale. Thousands of voices chanted his name, while only a small section of human students called out support for Hannah. The noise was deafening, but neither fighter seemed affected by it. The referee, a senior instructor from the Academy's combat department, stepped between the two fighters. "This is the championship match," he announced. "Victory goes to the fighter who forces their opponent to surrender, knocks them unconscious, or removes them from the combat circle. There are no time limits. Do both fighters understand?" Kale nodded confidently, flexing his massive hands. Hannah simply said, "Yes." "Take your positions," the referee commanded. The two fighters moved to opposite sides of the large circle. Kale cracked his knuckles and rolled his shoulders, loosening his muscles for battle. Hannah stood perfectly still, her breathing slow and controlled. She looked like a small statue made of calm determination. "Fighters, ready?" The referee called out, raising his arm high above his head. The entire arena held its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Begin." Kale immediately charged forward like a living earthquake. His footsteps shook the arena floor, and his battle cry echoed off the walls. He was not holding back. This was a full power assault designed to end the fight as quickly as possible. But Hannah did not run or try to avoid him. Instead, she took 3 small steps forward and dropped into a fighting stance that no one in the arena had ever seen before. Her feet were positioned in perfect balance, her arms held loosely but ready, and her eyes locked onto Kale's approaching form. The collision should have been catastrophic. Kale's charge had enough force to break through a stone wall, and Hannah weighed less than one of his arms. But instead of trying to match his strength, she did something that surprised everyone. She disappeared. Not literally, okay, but so quickly that many in the crowd lost track of her movement. As Kale's massive fist swept through the space where she had been standing, Hannah reappeared at his side. She struck him once in the ribs with her elbow, a blow that seemed tiny compared to his massive frame. Kale barely felt the impact. He spun around and swung his other arm in a wide arc, trying to catch Hannah before she could escape. But again, she was not where he expected her to be. She had moved behind him and struck another pressure point on his back. "Stand still and fight," Kale roared, frustrated by his inability to land a hit. For the next several minutes, the crowd watched an incredible display of speed and precision versus strength and power. Kale attacked with the fury of a hurricane, his fists and feet moving fast enough to blur. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not touch Hannah. She moved like water around his attacks, always staying just out of reach. Every few seconds, she would strike him with quick, precise blows to specific points on his body. The strikes looked harmless against his thick skin and massive muscles, but Kale was beginning to breathe harder. "What is she doing?" asked a confused Vorthok student. "Those little hits cannot possibly hurt him." "She's not trying to hurt him," observed Instructor Vexstar, who was watching with growing interest. "She is doing something else." As the fight continued, something strange began to happen. Kale's movements started to slow down. His powerful punches became slightly less accurate. His footwork, which had been perfect at the beginning of the match, became clumsy and uncertain. "Impossible," whispered a combat instructor. "Kale never gets tired. His endurance is legendary." But Hannah was not trying to tire him out through normal means. Each of her precise strikes had targeted specific nerve clusters and pressure points throughout his body. She was not damaging his muscles or bones. She was disrupting the signals between his brain and his body. Kale began to realize something was wrong. His left arm was not responding as quickly as it should. His right leg felt strangely numb. His vision was starting to blur around the edges. He had fought hundreds of battles, but nothing like this had ever happened to him before. "What did you do to me?" he demanded, his voice showing the first signs of uncertainty. Hannah stopped moving. For the first time since the fight began, she stood calmly in the center of the circle, completely unharmed and barely breathing hard. "I did what my grandfather taught me," she said quietly. "I found your weakness." "I have no weakness," Kale snarled, but his words sounded hollow, even to himself. "Everyone has a weakness," Hannah replied. "Yours is that you have never fought anyone who understands how your body really works." Kale launched himself at her one final time, putting every ounce of his remaining strength into a devastating attack. His fist moved toward Hannah's head with enough force to shatter concrete. This was his signature finishing move, the technique that had ended dozens of fights, but Hannah was ready for it. She had been watching him use this exact attack throughout the entire tournament, studying its timing and mechanics. As his fist approached, she stepped slightly to the side and reached up with both hands, instead of trying to block or avoid the punch. She caught his wrist and used his own momentum against him. At the same time, she struck the nerve cluster at the base of his neck with her free hand. Kale's massive body went completely limp. He crashed to the ground like a falling mountain, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He was not unconscious, but he could not move a single muscle. The arena fell into complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to be breathing. "Winner," the referee announced in a voice barely above a whisper, "Hannah Kim." The silence continued for several more seconds before exploding into chaos. Students from every species leaped to their feet, shouting in amazement and disbelief. The unthinkable had happened. The undefeated champion had been defeated by a quiet human girl who barely reached his shoulder. Hannah knelt beside Kale and gently massaged the pressure point she had struck. Within moments, feeling began to return to his body. She helped him sit up slowly, making sure he was not seriously injured. "How?" Kel asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than anger. "You are incredibly strong and skilled," Hannah said respectfully, "but you relied too much on intimidation. You expected me to be afraid of your strength, so you never learned to defend against someone who was not afraid." Kale looked at her with new understanding. "You were never trying to match my power. You were fighting a completely different battle. My grandfather used to say that there are many ways to win a fight," Hannah explained as she helped him to his feet. "The strongest way is not always the best way." Commander Thane stepped into the arena, his 4 arms spread wide in amazement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have witnessed something extraordinary today. Hannah Kim has shown us that victory comes not just from natural advantages, but from understanding, patience, and skill." He turned to address the entire arena. "Let this be a lesson to all of us. We must never underestimate others based on their appearance or species. True strength comes in many forms." As the crowd continued to cheer, Hannah looked up at the stands, where June Park and the other human students were celebrating wildly. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she smiled broadly. Later that evening, as news of the tournament spread throughout the galaxy, applications from human students began pouring into the academy's admissions office. Word had gotten out that humans possessed abilities that other species had never imagined. Hannah sat in her room, writing in her notebook one final time. On the last page, she wrote the words her grandfather had taught her long ago. "The greatest victories are won not by the strongest warriors, but by those who understand that true strength comes from within."